What if everything you've been told about spirituality, about enlightenment, about inner peace, about connecting to something greater, was only half the story? What if behind every sacred ritual, every divine revelation, and every moment of so-called awakening, there was a much darker, much more unsettling truth? Think about it. Why did ancient civilizations believe the gods demanded blood? Why did monks push themselves to the absolute brink of sanity in the name of enlightenment? Why do people who dive too deep into spiritual practices sometimes end up losing their grip on reality? For thousands of years, humanity has searched for meaning, for connection, for something beyond itself. But in that search, we've walked a fine line between wisdom and madness, between revelation and delusion, between enlightenment and complete psychological collapse. And here's the wildest part. This isn't just ancient history. These forces, these rituals, these psychological traps, they still exist today. Some are hidden in modern spiritual practices. Some are woven into the way we think. And some are still waiting to be discovered. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you might never look at human spirituality or your own mind the same way again. Spirituality has always been painted as a path to inner balance, wisdom, and transcendence. We imagine peaceful monks meditating on mountaintops, ancient shamans connecting with unseen forces, or seekers experiencing life-changing awakenings. But here's what no one talks about: the cost of stepping too close to the unknown. Because history tells a different story, one where spiritual exploration wasn't always about light. It was often born from darkness, suffering, and fear. And what's even stranger, the human mind seems wired to accept that suffering as part of the process. Think about it. Why did the Aztecs believe that the gods demanded human hearts to keep the universe alive? Why did ancient monks isolate themselves in complete darkness, refusing food and water for weeks? Why do some people, even today, report terrifying visions, overwhelming paranoia, or even psychological breaks after trying to open their mind too far? The answer to all of these: because the line between spiritual enlightenment and psychological collapse is much thinner than we think. And that's where this story begins. Part 1. A hidden truth, buried in history. Throughout history, some of the most extreme spiritual practices were rooted in a belief that suffering was the key to unlocking higher knowledge, that pain, fear, and sacrifice weren't just steps on the path, they were the path. And they weren't just physical trials. Some rituals were designed to break the mind itself. The Dionysian mysteries of ancient Greece threw followers into frenzied states where they tore animals apart with their bare hands. They believed this chaos brought them closer to the divine. The Desert Fathers, some of Christianity's earliest monks, locked themselves in isolation for years. Many reported terrifying visions of demons, shadows moving in their caves, and voices whispering in their ears. And then, there were the shamanic initiations, where indigenous spiritual leaders took hallucinogens so powerful, they believed they had died and come back as something else. Was this enlightenment? Or was it something deeper, something psychological, something biological, something that reprogrammed the human brain in ways we still don't fully understand? And here's where it gets really unsettling. What if all these experiences, the visions, the voices, the overwhelming sense of something greater, weren't signs of divine connection at all? What if they were just symptoms? The same symptoms experienced by people in psychotic episodes, near-death experiences, or extreme trauma? That's not speculation. That's neuroscience. And that's exactly what we're about to explore. Because the deeper we go, the more we start to see a terrifying pattern. One where history, science, and belief collide in ways that challenge everything we think we know about spirituality. For as long as humans have sought the divine, suffering has been part of the equation. It's almost universal, across different civilizations, belief systems, and time periods. Somewhere along the way, people became convinced that pain, sacrifice, and even death were necessary to connect with something greater. But why? Was it purely superstition? Or is there something deeper in the human mind that links suffering with meaning? Part 2. Blood, Fear, and the Gods, the Rituals of Pain. In many ancient cultures, suffering wasn't seen as a curse. It was a sacred offering. Here are two examples where some believed that the gods demanded pain to be appeased, and that suffering itself was a gateway to divine knowledge. The Aztec blood debt. The Aztecs believed their gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world. That meant humanity owed them a debt paid in blood. Captured warriors and even willing volunteers were led up temple steps, stretched over an altar, and had their beating hearts torn from their chests. The blood ran down the pyramids as priests offered the hearts to the sky, believing this act kept the sun moving and the universe from collapsing. To us, it sounds like brutality, but to them, it was an act of cosmic balance, a necessity to keep existence itself from unraveling. But the Aztecs weren't alone. The painful path to enlightenment in Buddhism and Hinduism, even in traditions that we now associate with peace, like Buddhism and Hinduism, early spiritual seekers believed that denying the body was the only way to free the soul. The belief, if you could master pain and hunger, you could master the mind. But many didn't survive long enough to find out if it worked. Jainist monks practiced extreme non-violence, sometimes refusing to drink water if it contained even a microscopic life form. Some took salakana, a ritual fasting to death, as the ultimate purification of the soul. The same pattern appears again and again. Suffering was seen as a shortcut to transcendence. But why? Part 3. The Psychology of Suffering and Spirituality. There's a strange, psychological reason why pain and suffering have always been linked to spiritual growth, and it has everything to do with how the brain processes trauma. When the body undergoes intense stress, like fasting, pain, or isolation, it releases endorphins, serotonin, and even hallucinogenic chemicals. This can create the feeling of breaking through reality into something greater. Altered states of consciousness, the kind often reported by monks, shamans, and mystics, can be induced by extreme deprivation. Near-death experiences, NDEs, show a similar pattern. People who have survived medical death often report visions, out-of-body experiences, and overwhelming feelings of connection to the universe. In short, the brain is wired to make suffering feel meaningful. That's why so many religious traditions incorporated it, because the effects were real. Some saw visions, some heard voices, some lost their sense of self entirely and felt they had become part of something greater. The question is, was that truly divine enlightenment? Or was it just the mind trying to survive? Part 4. The thin line between spiritual awakening and madness. For some, these extreme spiritual practices led to breakthroughs, but for others, they led to something much darker: psychosis, paranoia, and even death. In Christianity's early days, the Desert Fathers, monks who retreated into isolation for years, reported terrifying hallucinations of demons, voices whispering in their ears, and shadows moving in their caves. In Hinduism, the Kundalini awakening is said to be a powerful spiritual transformation, but some people experience it as searing pain, uncontrollable visions, and paranoia. Even in modern times, deep meditation has caused psychotic breaks in some individuals, leading to confusion, detachment from reality, and complete loss of identity. If spiritual suffering is supposed to bring enlightenment, why does it sometimes push people into madness instead? Maybe the real question is, Were ancient spiritual seekers touching something divine? Or were they just hacking their own brains? And if they were, how much of what we consider spiritual truth is actually just a biological trick? That's what we'll uncover next. Because this pattern doesn't just explain the past, it might explain every religious vision, every mystical encounter, and every spiritual awakening, ever. Spirituality has always been a force capable of inspiring and uniting people. But just as it has been used to bring peace and meaning, it has also been twisted into one of the most powerful tools of control in human history. Because when you can make people believe that an unseen force is watching them, judging them, and punishing them, you don't just control their actions, you control their minds. And that's exactly what rulers, priests, and spiritual leaders have done for thousands of years. Part 5. Divine Fear. How spirituality became a tool of power. One of the most effective ways to control a population is through fear of the unknown. It's hard to rebel against a king, a leader, or a priest. But what about against a god, a cosmic force, or the fabric of reality itself? By convincing people that their suffering, their struggles, and even their thoughts were being monitored by divine forces, rulers and religious authorities ensured absolute obedience. Ancient Egypt. The pharaohs claimed to be literal gods. Disobeying them wasn't just a crime, it was a sin against the universe. Medieval Europe. The Catholic Church taught that anyone who questioned its authority could be damned to eternal torture. The fear of hellfire was more powerful than any law. Ancient China. The concept of the mandate of heaven meant that if a ruler was overthrown, it was proof that the gods had abandoned him. This created a cycle where leaders justified their rule with divine approval. But fear wasn't just about punishment in the afterlife. It was used to control behavior in the present. Part 6. The curse that kills, the power of belief itself. Here's where things get even stranger, because sometimes belief alone is enough to destroy a person. There's a well-documented psychological phenomenon called the nocebo effect. It's the dark twin of the placebo effect, where belief in a positive outcome can heal. Belief in a negative outcome can actually kill. Throughout history, this effect was weaponized. Here's 2 examples. The Roman curse tablets. The Romans believed in binding curses, where a person's name would be written on a tablet, often alongside gruesome requests for divine punishment. These tablets were buried near temples, meant to invoke gods or spirits to bring misfortune or death upon an enemy. Some victims who believed they had been cursed actually became sick and died, even though there was no physical cause, just the power of suggestion. The voodoo death phenomenon. In certain cultures, witch doctors or shamans had the power to point the bone, a ritual where they would curse someone to die. Many times, the cursed individual would weaken and perish within days or weeks, not because of actual magic, but because their belief in the curse triggered extreme stress, immune system failure, and ultimately death. Medical research has backed this up. Intense psychological distress can cause organ failure, heart attacks, and immune shutdown. This isn't supernatural. This is the brain's ability to manifest its deepest fears into reality. Part 7. Religious fear and mind control. The psychology behind it. Why does fear-based belief work so well? Because it bypasses logic and directly affects survival instincts. Fear activates the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for fight or flight responses. High stress levels release cortisol, weakening rational thought and making people more obedient. Repetitive exposure to fear-based messages creates long-term conditioning, making individuals less likely to question authority. Religious institutions have understood this for centuries. The idea of eternal damnation was crafted to ensure obedience, not just to gods, but to the people who claimed to speak for them. Cult leaders use fear of punishment or bad karma to keep followers in line, making them afraid to leave. Even today, social shaming and divine guilt keep people from questioning certain belief systems, even when they logically disagree. Part 8. When spirituality becomes a cage instead of a path. Here's the irony. Spirituality is supposed to set people free. It's supposed to offer meaning, purpose, and a sense of connection. But when fear is introduced, it does the opposite. It traps people. It forces them into obedience. It makes them act not out of love, but out of terror. So the question is, at what point does a spiritual belief stop being about faith and start being psychological warfare? And even more disturbingly, how much of our own belief systems today still carry remnants of this ancient manipulation? Because the next time you feel guilty, afraid, or unworthy because of something you were taught to believe, ask yourself, is this really spiritual truth? Or is it just someone else's control tactic still echoing in my mind? For thousands of years, people have reported seeing visions, hearing voices, and feeling the presence of divine beings. From prophets who claim to receive messages from the heavens to modern-day mystics who swear they've touched something beyond reality, these experiences have shaped religions, cultures, and entire belief systems. But here's the question. Are these experiences proof of the divine? Or are they simply tricks of the human brain? Science has been studying this for decades, and what researchers have found is both fascinating and unsettling. Part 9. The brain's role in spiritual visions. Many religious experiences, whether it's seeing an angel, hearing the voice of God, or feeling an overwhelming sense of cosmic unity, can actually be explained by neuroscience. Because when you break it down, spiritual visions and hallucinations share a lot in common. The temporal lobe connection. The temporal lobe is the part of the brain responsible for processing emotions, memory, and sensory input. Studies show that overactivity in this region can cause people to hear voices, feel presences, or even experience out-of-body sensations. Some researchers believe that prophets, saints, and even cult leaders may have had temporal lobe epilepsy, a condition that can induce powerful spiritual hallucinations. The God Helmet experiment. In a famous experiment, neuroscientists built a device called the God Helmet, a helmet that stimulates the brain with electromagnetic waves. When people wore it, many reported feeling the presence of an unseen being, hearing voices, or even experiencing intense euphoria. The takeaway? Our brains are wired to create spiritual experiences, even when no divine force is present. DMT, the spirit molecule. The human brain produces small amounts of DMT, dimethyltryptamine, a powerful psychedelic. People who take DMT report seeing otherworldly beings, traveling to different dimensions, or even experiencing life reviews. Some researchers believe that DMT may be naturally released during near-death experiences, creating the white light effect many people describe. So when someone claims they had a spiritual awakening, saw a divine figure, or visited another realm, could it actually be a biological process playing out in their brain? Part 10. Religious hallucinations, prophecy, or psychosis. If spiritual visions come from the brain, what does that say about the prophets, mystics, and religious leaders throughout history? Here are 3 cases where what was once considered divine intervention may have actually been a neurological condition. Joan of Arc, messenger of God, or temporal lobe epilepsy. Joan of Arc, the teenage warrior who led France to victory, claimed to hear voices and see angels. She described her visions in extreme detail and was completely convinced they were real. But modern neurologists suggest she may have had temporal lobe epilepsy or schizophrenia, which could explain her auditory and visual hallucinations. St. Paul, a vision on the road to Damascus. Paul the Apostle, one of the most important figures in Christianity, had a vision of Jesus while traveling to Damascus. He described seeing a blinding light, hearing a voice, and losing his sight temporarily. But historians and doctors have suggested that this could have been a seizure, a migraine aura, or even a psychedelic experience. Ezekiel's UFO-like vision. The prophet Ezekiel in the Bible describes a vision of flying wheels covered in eyes, a glowing fire, and strange humanoid figures. Some believe this was a genuine spiritual experience, while others suggest it was a hallucination triggered by fasting, illness, or an altered mental state. If these experiences were truly divine, why do they match up so perfectly with modern cases of hallucination, epilepsy, and psychedelic trips? Part 11. Is spirituality just a brain trick? If all these experiences, visions, out-of-body moments, divine voices, can be explained by science, does that mean spirituality isn't real? Or does it mean that the brain itself is the gateway to something greater? Because the fact remains, these experiences feel profoundly real to those who have them. Many spiritual seekers describe similar effects across different cultures and religions. Some scientists even suggest that our brains may be naturally tuned to a higher frequency that we don't yet understand. So maybe these experiences aren't just illusions. Maybe they're a glitch in the brain's programming, a doorway to something we can't fully comprehend. And if that's the case, the real question isn't whether these visions are real. It's what happens if we push past the limits of the brain and find out. Meditation, spiritual awakening, and deep introspection are often seen as pathways to enlightenment, tools for achieving inner peace, heightened awareness, and even a sense of divine connection. We hear stories of people reaching profound realizations, experiencing states of bliss, and completely transforming their lives. But there's another side to this journey, one that's rarely talked about. Because while meditation and spiritual awakening can bring enlightenment, they can also bring madness, terror, and complete psychological collapse. In some cases, the search for higher consciousness has led people to hallucinations, paranoia, psychotic breaks, and even death. And the strangest part? These effects aren't just random. They follow a pattern, one that science is only beginning to understand. Part 12. When meditation goes too far. Meditation is usually thought of as a simple relaxation technique. Close your eyes, focus on your breath, let go of your thoughts. But advanced meditation, especially prolonged and intense practice, can have unexpected and disturbing effects on the brain. In some traditions, monks, yogis, and spiritual seekers spend weeks, months, even years in deep meditation, stripping away all distractions and plunging into their inner world. But what happens when that inner world turns against you? The Kundalini awakening phenomenon. In Hindu and Buddhist traditions, Kundalini is believed to be a powerful energy force that lies dormant at the base of the spine. When awakened, it's said to rise through the body, unlocking spiritual awareness. But many people who experience an uncontrolled Kundalini awakening report horrific symptoms, intense physical pain, involuntary body movements, overwhelming fear, and even psychotic episodes. Some describe it as being electrocuted from the inside, or feeling like their soul is being ripped apart. Meditation-induced psychosis. A study published in PLOS One found that some people who meditate intensively experience hallucinations, paranoia, or extreme anxiety. Buddhist monks who isolate themselves for deep meditation have reported hearing voices, seeing shadowy figures, and feeling their sense of self completely dissolve. The problem? Once these symptoms start, they don't always go away. Some people remain trapped in a detached, altered state of consciousness long after they stop meditating. The dark night of the soul. Many spiritual traditions describe a phase where, after deep meditation or spiritual awakening, a person falls into a profound depression. They report feeling disconnected from reality, emotionally numb, or even suicidal. Some say this is a natural step toward enlightenment, a necessary destruction of the ego. But from a psychological perspective, it mirrors symptoms of dissociation, depersonalization, and even PTSD. So why does this happen? Part 13. The science behind meditation's dark side. Most people associate meditation with calm and relaxation, but at a neurological level, it can actually do something far more intense. Meditation alters brain structure. MRI studies show that long-term meditation physically changes the brain, specifically the default mode network, which controls self-referential thoughts. This is why deep meditators often report a loss of self-identity, a feeling of being one with everything. But in some cases, this ego death can be traumatic, leading to existential crisis, paranoia, or even psychosis. The effects of sensory deprivation. Meditation often involves closing off external senses, focusing only on the inner world. But the brain relies on sensory input to stay grounded in reality. When those inputs are reduced, it starts to create its own experiences. This is why monks in isolation, prisoners in solitary confinement, and people in sensory deprivation tanks often experience vivid hallucinations. In other words, meditation doesn't always lead to peace. For some, it can rewire the brain in ways that are terrifying and uncontrollable. Part 14. The spiritual versus psychological debate. What's really happening? Many spiritual traditions warn about these dangers, but they don't always see them as negative. In Hinduism and Buddhism, these breakdowns are seen as a necessary destruction of the ego, a painful but essential step toward enlightenment. Some yogic traditions believe that the mind must be purged of all attachments before true awakening can occur. Even in Christianity, mystics have described spiritual trials where they felt abandoned, attacked by demons, or overwhelmed with despair before reaching divine understanding. But from a psychological standpoint, these aren't spiritual battles. They're neurological events. What some call ego death, psychologists call depersonalization disorder, a condition where a person feels disconnected from their own identity. What some call spiritual trials, neuroscientists call amygdala hyperactivity, an overactive fear response caused by deep introspection. What some call awakening symptoms, doctors call psychosis, a loss of touch with reality due to extreme mental strain. So the question is, are these people truly reaching enlightenment, or are they unknowingly triggering a neurological overload? Part 15. The risks of unlocking the mind. In modern times, people are more interested than ever in spiritual exploration. Meditation apps, psychedelic retreats, and New Age practices promise transcendence and awakening. But how many of them warn about the risks? Because what history, psychology, and neuroscience all seem to agree on is this: the mind is fragile. Pushing it too far, too fast, can have irreversible consequences. And not everyone who seeks enlightenment is prepared for what they might find. If spirituality is a door to something greater, then maybe some doors were never meant to be opened. And maybe, just maybe, some people never come back the same. For thousands of years, human beings have sought meaning, something greater than themselves. Spirituality has always been at the core of that search, offering answers to the biggest questions. Why are we here? What happens when we die? Is there something beyond this reality? But as we've uncovered in this video, the pursuit of enlightenment has never been as simple as peace and wisdom. In fact, it has often been a journey through fear, suffering, psychological collapse, and even death. And that raises a disturbing question. Have we been chasing something divine? Or have we simply been pushing the limits of our own fragile minds? Conclusion: the patterns we can't ignore. When we take a step back and look at the bigger picture, a pattern emerges, one that stretches across every culture, every time period, and every belief system. Ancient civilizations believed suffering brought them closer to the gods, but science now tells us that suffering alters the brain in ways that mimic religious experiences. Prophets, saints, and mystics claim to hear voices and see visions. But neuroscience suggests these might be hallucinations triggered by temporal lobe activity. Meditation is meant to bring peace and enlightenment, but pushed too far, and it can lead to psychosis, depersonalization, and psychological breakdowns. So what does this mean? Are we unlocking something or breaking ourselves? If spiritual experiences can be explained by the brain, does that mean they aren't real? Or does it mean that our brains are naturally wired to access something greater, but at a cost? Because even though science can explain what happens inside the mind during deep meditation, near-death experiences, or religious visions, it can't fully explain why these experiences feel so profoundly real. And that's where things get complicated. If meditation and suffering can induce enlightenment, is enlightenment just a trick of the mind? If visions of angels and spirits can be recreated with brain stimulation, does that mean no one has ever truly seen the divine? Or is it possible that these altered states of consciousness are the only way for us to perceive something that exists beyond normal human experience? Maybe spiritual awakenings aren't hallucinations. Maybe they are glitches in our perception, brief moments where we see the universe as it truly is. And if that's the case, the real danger isn't that spirituality is a lie. The real danger is that we might not be ready for the truth. Final thought: the door that can't be closed. Here's what we know. People throughout history have sacrificed, suffered, and even lost their minds in pursuit of enlightenment. Science has proven that spiritual states can be induced through suffering, sensory deprivation, and brain stimulation. But what we haven't proven is whether these experiences are mere illusions or glimpses into something beyond our understanding. So the final question isn't whether spirituality is real. The final question is, what happens if we push too far? Because history has shown us that some doors, once opened, can never be closed. And maybe, just maybe, some people who walk through those doors never truly came back. If you made it to the end of this video, you already know this isn't the kind of thing most people think about. But you're not most people, are you? Here, I explore the darker, hidden sides of the past, psychology, spirituality, and human consciousness, and question everything that doesn't have easy answers. If there were any topics in this video you want to learn more about, please comment and let me know, and I'll make a video that expands on it. Please consider subscribing. I would really love to build even a small audience that enjoys this train of thought.